Welcome to Santana True Crime. Tonight we've got a special guest. We've got author Susan Fensten. She is the author of You Have a Soft Voice, Susan. And you can pick that up currently on Amazon, Barnes& and Noble. It's also available on Audible. And Susan, can you tell us about the deal that you made with Audible? This is something that's very unique.
Hi, thank you so much for having me on, Cameron. I really appreciate it. Well, the book is a long time in writing and a long time in getting it published. I started writing the book about 2007, not long after the sort of conclusion of the events, and it's taken a while. But a couple of years ago, I did a podcast with a true crime podcaster and a producer for a Los Angeles and London based documentary production company, heard my interview and signed me up to develop projects around my book and got me into Audible, where they produced a podcast for me, which was me describing the events. And then there's guests talking, and there's also voice actors playing some of the parts. And that came out in July. It's a project we're all very, very proud of. Within a week, it shot to the top 10 audiobooks in America and then climbed to number 9. And then it kind of hung in there for a while. And we were actually nominated for a Webby Award for 2025 for limited series documentary, which was a great honor and a tremendous recognition for all of the work that went into producing the podcast, which is called Dear Cousin.
Yeah, that's actually what drew my attention to your book was I saw the advertisement for Dear Cousin, and I thought that's the first time I've ever seen one from Audible doing that. Are you the first? Do you know?
What, to do a podcast based
With
on?
well, the approach that Audible has had. Are you the first one with Audible that has done that?
I'm not sure what you mean. Sorry.
I don't. So with Audible, most people go there to buy a book, and a book is, when you produce it on audio, it's about 12 hours long, let's say.
Right.
Your project that you did with them, Hello Susan, is, I believe, 4 hours and 25 minutes. So, it's perfect for a car ride. And you condense down the actual Audible book to, a series and added voices. That's an approach that I haven't seen before because it's not really a podcast per se. It's more of I don't know, kind of like a hybrid podcast. I really don't know how to explain that, but I
Well, I
thought that
think
was very unique either way.
I thought it was too, and I wasn't sure how it was all going to turn out. But basically, the book is the book, and you can get it in print. There's also an audio version of the book, which is a reading of the entire book from beginning to end. Uh, the podcast, which is also categorized as an audiobook with Audible, was basically the whole story condensed into a 4 hour format of 4.5 hours of me telling the story, plus interviews from experts in the area of psychology and forensic psychology, the FBI agent and the federal prosecutor who are involved in the case also contributed to the podcast Dear Cousin. So it was a little unusual, but I think they did a really incredible job at just capturing the arc of the story with all the essentials in it. And it takes you through basically the story, but in the book, there's a lot more. There's a lot of stuff in the book that we didn't get into in the podcast. So you get to sort of enjoy both if you like the story.
Yeah, the book was very detailed, and I really appreciated that. And for those that are listening, if you're wanting to hear Dear Susan, then
It's Dear
Audible,
Cousin.
or sorry, Dear Cousin,
Yeah,
mistake on that.
no problem.
You can actually get it for free if you've got an Amazon Prime account. So, you might as well check it out. So let's go ahead and transition into the book. The book really starts out with your childhood, and you've really got a unique perspective of living in New York, and you've got a sister as well, and your dad is kind of out of the picture. Is that right? Can you kind of describe your childhood or
Yeah,
your early memories?
yeah. I was born and raised in Manhattan with my sister in the 1960s, and my parents were both artists. My mother came to New York City to study fashion illustration at Parsons School of Design, and my father was involved in acting with the Actor Studio with Lee and Susan Strasberg, which is a world-renowned acting studio, very famous. And two artists fell in love, had kids, and then it all kind of came apart. So my mother and my sister and I kind of went on our own way, and raised by my mother. And we had a pretty good life. I mean, look, it was a different era, a different time. We were not, we were not of means. We were definitely struggling, but we had a very rich home life, even though we were, didn't have a lot of money and we didn't have a lot of things. My mother worked really hard. And overall, I really, I enjoyed growing up in the city. It was kind of exciting. It was back in the 1960s, and it was kind of rough. But, when that's your environment, you adapt to it, and you enjoy it. All kids enjoy their childhoods. Um, but it was definitely not easy by any stretch at all. But I think that, growing up that way gives you a little more character, a little more appreciation for the rest of your life in terms of values.
Yeah, I think I'm sure there's a lot of lessons learned in that. You talked about in your book of how you were, I believe you were going to see Gone with the Wind, and you tried to get in, and they didn't let you in because your age, and then you were looking around and you saw your dad. Can you talk about that experience? Because I thought that was kind of unique.
Yeah. My sister, when we moved to Queens, my sister ran away from home, and I didn't have any friends. I had to start a new school. I left all my friends in Manhattan, and I was like, when you're 12 years old, you're in that awkward time where you're trying to adjust and find out who you are. And I was feeling very lost and very alone for a long time. So one afternoon, I decided to go over to the theater and just sit in the dark and watch Gone with the Wind for a few hours. It's a great movie. I've seen it before, and I just wanted to kill a hot afternoon by myself. And when I got to the ticket counter, the ticket seller asked me how old I was, and I said I was 12. And she said, "Well, kids are not allowed in without their parents." And I was really surprised, because when we used to go to theaters in Manhattan as kids, they just let us in. So this was just kind of like a door shut in my face I wasn't expecting. But I told her I'm not a kid. I tried to tell her I'm not a kid. So anyway, I was very disappointed. And I was just going to walk home. And when I I literally turned around, and right in front of the theater was a bus stop, and my father was waiting for the bus all by himself. And that's not something I expected to see at all, because he lived in Manhattan, and I hadn't seen him since I was 5 years old. So I was really surprised, but I walked up to him and I introduced myself to him.
Can you tell us about that interaction? I mean, did that feel awkward for you? Do you remember? Did he seem phased by it at all?
He was really surprised. I was just, a 12-year-old, and I wasn't really sure what to do, but I figured that's what you do. You walk over and you say hello. So I said, "Hey, I'm your kid." And I mean, I literally had not seen him since I was 5 years old. It had been 7 years. So it's like that's a lifetime between 5 and 12. So
Right.
he was like, "Oh, wow, how are you?" And I was like, "Okay." He said, "How's your mother?" I said, "Oh, she's okay." And I don't remember him asking about my sister, and I don't remember what I said, because she had already she had already run away from home, and she had been gone for a while. And I don't remember what that part of the conversation was like. I don't remember getting into that with him. It was all kind of quick. And So we stood there for a couple of minutes, and the bus came, and that was it. And he just got on the bus, and there, it was just, that was the end. I mean, he didn't ask me for our phone number. He didn't say he would call. He didn't say, there was no hug, no kiss. There was nothing that you would expect from your father. I mean, the whole thing was awkward for both of us, I'm sure.
Do you remember how you felt about that? I mean, did you feel rejected, or is this just kind of a, did you not see him in that light as being a father? If that makes sense.
Yeah, it does make sense because he was never really there. So there wasn't a whole lot of emotion there. But like all human beings, even though maybe right on the top of things you're not feeling it, deep down there's all that unconscious stuff that goes back to your roots that are still there and still operating in your, in the way you think, in the way you view the world, the way you see yourself. So it was kind of a strange moment. What I thought was important was that he saw me. I wanted him to see me and acknowledge me, and I thought that was the whole point of it. I didn't expect anything more, and there wasn't anything more. It really just went back to him being gone again. There wasn't like, I wasn't crying, I wasn't upset, I wasn't overjoyed. It was just kind of like a detachment.
So throughout the years, you kind of run into him or you find out where he lives. And you talk about in the book about how there's this one instance where he tried to like grab your chest. Um, how old were you then?
Well, he didn't try to grab my chest physically. He just made a hand gesture about, my physical appearance. I was sort of in and out of his life. I had already sort of, I knew where he lived. We were in contact, but, he was still very, I mean, this is a guy who didn't have a phone. This is somebody who really didn't want people in his life, you know, didn't didn't really have any friends. He just stuck to his job as a bike messenger. He was very into photography. He had a dark room in his studio apartment where he developed all of his photos and printed all of his photos. He was just like a very lonely, lone guy. And he saw me one day when I was down in the village, and he said I looked really nice. And then he mentioned something about, all the boys must be going crazy, and he made this sort of hand gesture. And, that was very off-putting, a little upsetting. But, like all things, I just kind of dealt with it.
And did he have some mental health issues as well that you knew about, or was he ever diagnosed with anything, or was this, just kind of his personality?
Well, we always knew that he had problems. He was in and out of a psychiatric ward in a hospital in New York City called Bellevue that everybody who lives here knows about. Um, I don't know what he was diagnosed with. I mean, back then, the 60s was a different time. I don't really recall like having the discussions about clinical diagnoses or what the actual problem. I mean, today everything's in a package, everything's on an ingredient list, everything's on a box. And back then it was just like, okay, yeah, he just kind of fell off the deep end and didn't want to deal with life and just retreated. He was a very reclusive person, very socially awkward. I guess people would like to ascribe that to like maybe Asperger's or autism, but I think it's really something else. I think there are just some people in this world that don't really want to be a part of society.
Yeah, and the reason why I bring that up is, we'll get to this later where you're trying to reconnect with your relatives. Some of those issues pop up, and uh, in my mind, I would think that, maybe this is something genetic. But before we go to that, you and your sister were at one time really close, right? And then she started to get into some drug use and um, some other activities. Can you tell us about your relationship with her?
Yeah, my relationship with my sister was a lifelong of a kind of a struggle. she really didn't like me. She didn't really treat me very well. She was always fighting with me and making me cry and always causing upset. And she was just always in an antagonistic position with me. But I really loved my sister. I always really looked up to her. It was just us two. She was my big sister. I really admired her for a lot of things, but we were actually really different people. I was kind of like a more quiet, sensitive, artistic person, and my sister was just like kind of like more of a hellraiser. You know, she hung out with the Hell's Angels. She hung out with bikers. Sorry, it's my dog. Sorry,
It's
Des,
okay.
stop. She'll stop. Um, we were very different in nature, my sister and I. So we we weren't that close, and the only time we actually got close is when she had her baby in 1986. I was thrilled. I was so happy she was having a baby, and I thought it was a great thing. And then we actually got close at that point. But her life had been really rocky. You know, she ran away from home at age 12 when we moved to Queens. I mean, she moved to Detroit. I mean, that's like kind of a drastic, super adventurous, extreme thing for someone who's not even 13 years old yet to run away from home and move and go to Detroit, of all places. She went with her boyfriend who was 18, and she stayed there for like a year and a half. So she took that step in her life that just took her way off the edge, and she never really recovered from it. I understood why she left home. But as a youngster at that age, there's no way I could have imagined running away from home. And she had also, when she came back, got involved with drugs, and she was like, doing things that, were just very destructive. And I don't know, she was just a very emotionally kind of volatile person who could never really settle down. So when she was going to have her baby, I thought, okay, she's finally going to settle down.
Right. And so she eventually commits suicide, right?
Yes.
So
Yeah.
you've really experienced really a lot of tragedies between that and then you're taking care of your dad before he passed away.
Yeah.
Um, and the reason why I bring that up is, those are some really big experiences. And then you've got a friend, Bobby, who he lives in the neighborhood. Would that be accurate? Or
Well, he lived in the same building that I had moved into. Um, I moved to Williamsburg, Brooklyn in 1985, and it has really changed. The neighborhood has changed like drastically. Now it's like a world destination. It's very expensive, but it was basically like an off the beaten path, kind of rundown neighborhood that had a long history, that had just not like no one. It was like off the general radar. Like nobody thought about Williamsburg back then. It was just a cheap place to live. It was close to Manhattan. It was actually really great in a lot of ways. A lot of artists were there. Of course, there were like people still who actually lived in the neighborhood, artists moving in, new people moving in. And I moved into a building, and one of my upstairs neighbors was a guy named Bobby. That's how I met him.
so you're working for Oxford Press at the time, is that right?
At that time, no. At that time, I was temping, doing a lot of office temp
Okay.
work in the 1980s. I mean, I went to art school. I didn't really have a lot of direction. I moved out of my house very early and very young without a lot of direction. I took some classes at Hunter College. I went to art school for a couple of years, which was like a really smart thing for me to do. One of the best things I've ever done. But I wasn't like like most kids. You grow up, you graduate from high school. Your parents have already got this plan for you. You're going to go to college. You're going to do this. They do all this stuff for you. In my case, it was like, oh, you're 19. It's time to move out. But there was no plan. So I was just out there surviving, odd
That makes
jobs, doing
sense,
what
yeah.
I could, just trying to figure out my life. And believe me, it was not easy. No, I had no help from anybody. I'm out there just thrown into the world. I think, that's part of like a lot of what people in my generation did. I think kids stay home a lot longer these days. So I was just kind of tossed out there, and I was fine with it. But like I just was doing whatever I could to survive. I didn't start working at Oxford University Press until 1998. So that those early times in the 1980s when I was living in Williamsburg, I was working for artists, doing studio work, waitressing. Uh, then I started getting office temp work, which was like the leg up into like trying to find like a legitimate, kind of real
Okay.
job.
So at some point, or why don't you tell me, at what point did you decide to reach out to try to find some relatives? And can you kind of explain your reasoning for that?
Well, I had never met my father's parents, so I'd never known my grandparents. Really didn't know very much about them. My father, like I said, was a very introverted, not very talkative person. He never talked about his family. He just would never. I couldn't get him to talk about anything. A lot of the times I hung out with him, there was just a lot of quiet, like awkward quiet. So I had nothing to go on. But it was about 2003 when the internet was just about born. I was just kind of very interested in history and World War II and what happened in Germany and Europe during the Holocaust. And I was trying to like figure out, where does my Jewish part of my family fit into this? My father's of Jewish descent. So I was just trying to figure out like who were these people. I really had nothing to go on. So there was a site called genealogy.com, and it was a very basic, very crude kind of old style message board with no bells, no whistles, no animation. It was just like threads of conversations. And I posted a message asking if anybody knew or heard of, and oh, but each page in that website was organized by name. So you could go to your family's name and post a message, and people would reply. So I posted a message asking if anybody knew anything about Morris Fensten or Feinstein, who was born in New York City around the turn of the century or so. And I really didn't expect anybody to answer. There were a lot of messages. There's a lot of people named Feinstein. My name is Fensten, so it came from Feinstein. So I really wasn't expecting any answer at all.
And then you get a message from Karen, right?
Yes, yes.
And can you kind of describe that first message and how you felt about that?
Well, within about a week, a little bit more than a week, it was really no time at all, just a few days, really. I got a response from somebody whose name was Karen Gardner, and she said that she had just sort of been poking around on the website and just by, afterthought, checked out her family page and saw my message. And she said, quote unquote, she nearly fell out of her chair because it just sounded like we had a possible similar grandfather, which certainly is plausible because my grandfather had two marriages. He had two daughters and was married. I think his wife died, which I found out later through other genealogical searches. But he had two sets of children, which made it plausible that there were other distant relatives out there. We could have the same grandfather.
And did she send a picture initially, or was that later on?
Well, it took a little while, but eventually she did send a couple of pictures. She did send was a formal sit down portrait of a group of people. She said were her family, and then she sent another picture, a kind of an old photo. Everything in the room looked like from the 1960s. Remember when everything was like almond, like sort of yellow colored, like yellow drapes, yellow bedspread, yellow. I mean, but it was a yellowed photo with a lot of yellow in it, and there was this elderly lady in a dress sitting on a bed, and I think there was a young kid with her. And when I looked at that picture, I didn't really think much of it because I didn't like sense any connection to it. But then again, I have never seen a picture of my grandmother on my father's side, so I wasn't really sure of what I was looking at. But she said it was her mother, and she sent me a photo of what she said was her family.
And so then you learn about some relatives on her side as well, particularly Leonard and Sharon. And can you tell us about how they were introduced to you? Or
It took a little while for her to, talk about her relatives, and I understood that because we didn't know each other. We were just strangers meeting on the internet, and I wasn't like being very pushy or aggressive about asking a lot of questions because I respect people's privacy, and I thought, well, if she wants to talk to me about stuff, she can talk to me. I didn't want to push too hard. So she got around to telling me that she had a brother and a sister, and not much more than that, but she said that, maybe we could, all get introduced or we could meet. And that seemed exciting and kind of cool to me because at that point, our correspondence was just very normal. It was like, how's your holiday? What are you making for Thanksgiving? Like just very like day to day normal stuff. And I was enjoying the correspondence because I liked having pen pals. And, even before the internet, I had pen pals that I used to write to, like actual letters, back when we used to write on paper and put them in the mail and wait and then get a mail, get a letter back in the mail. So I was enjoying the correspondence, and it was kind of great because like, as it's laid out in my family story, I was like kind of used to losing people, so gaining people was just very unexpected, and it was kind of exciting. Like I was happy about it.
yeah, and so I know that you're happy about that, and you're doing this on instant messenger is the big kind of communication program back then too, which I know a lot of people that are younger may not remember. Um, but to kind of keep in mind with that is you have to be at your computer to be able to use it. So it's not like today where we can, text each other. When did things kind of progress and start to get weird with Karen and that whole dynamic?
Well, Karen and I were just writing to each other by email. She and I hadn't gone on what we were using back then, which was AOL Instant Messenger. I don't know if a lot of young people today would not even know about it, but it was just a predecessor for what we'd use for chat now. A little box would appear, and you would just type in real time, and you'd get your message back. And there was all little things like emojis and sounds, and you could have your buddy list up, and you can see when your friends are on or off. It would say whether you were online or offline. At one point, Karen asked me if it was okay for me to send her brother Leonard my email address. And, the way it was asked, it was very formal and very polite. Nobody was rushing into anything. It was like, oh, she wasn't just handing out my email to people. She asked me first, and if I could give Leonard my email address. And I said yes. And then he did write to me by email, and he said, welcome to the family. And, I've heard some things about you. And then he gave me his AOL Instant Messenger handle, which was L Nachman1. And so I just added that to my AOL buddy list. So that's where that whole kind of started. And then I didn't hear from him for a while. I kind of said, hey, if you're working in Manhattan, maybe we could meet in the city sometime for lunch and have an iced tea or a coffee or something and just say hello. Like, I just thought like that might be fun, in a safe out public environment, sit down, say hello. And if it's cool, great. And if, things are not cool and maybe there's no, connection or, we could just like, disengage and that would be the end of it. But
Right.
I had definitely
Kind of
left
like
the
a
door.
blind date.
Yeah, like not a date though, but like I had definitely
Well,
left
yeah, but with a
yeah,
relative. Yeah.
yeah, just left the door open for just a friendly hello, like that was it. And then I didn't hear from him for a while. So while Karen and I were continuing our, correspondences, our emails back and forth, she asked me like if I had heard from Leonard yet. And I said that I hadn't. It had been a couple of months. And she was surprised, she was like, oh, I thought you two would be, fast friends by now. And she said that she worried that maybe Sharon had already gotten to him, which was like the beginning of, the weird, the weirdness of it all.
Yeah, and then things kind of get really crazy. You start to get like porn in your email, right? Can you I know that even email is kind of new, and it's not like today where if you get spam, you kind of expect it. Uh, Can you talk about kind of those first experiences of getting that stuff and what you felt like and
Well, all of a sudden, out of nowhere, I started getting signed up for all kinds of web pages, newsletters, links to things of every type of adult material, like every range, escorts, uh, every type of sex you can imagine, like extreme stuff, like that I would never ever be interested in a million years. I mean, and I thought it was like I didn't think anything of because I don't look at those websites, so I couldn't understand how the stuff was coming back to me. It's not like I went to a website and signed up for something and I was just getting spam. It was just it definitely had the impression of being sent to me specifically. And it just came in by the dozens. Like I would just be sitting at my inbox and like all of a sudden, like all of this stuff would just streaming into my email, like signing up for this, signing up for that, welcome, triple X cam, this, that, and the other. And that started getting really weird.
and so it gets to the point where you start to tell Karen about this, right? Because you don't you notice that when Leonard is online, that's when you're receiving all this stuff.
Yeah. Well, what would happen was since he was on my Leonard was on my AOL Instant Messenger buddy list, you would literally see his icon sign on, and there were also little sound cards that came with it, like a door opening or wind blowing. But it was very dramatic, like the early internet. Um, so he would sign on, and then within a couple of seconds, I would get five, six, seven, eight types of emails, pornographic emails sent into my inbox, and then it would stop. And then he would sign off. And then he would sign on again, and it would start all over again. So I started to see this, and then I was like starting to put it together like, oh my God, this guy is like singling me out for something. He's weird. He's kind of fixated on me. Why is he sending this to me? I've never spoken to him. I've never met him. Uh, that was very, very just, kind of alarming. So I started making complaints, like writing to AOL, writing to my internet carriers like Roadrunner. I think I had Roadrunner at the time, which was cable in New York City, and trying to get somebody to make it stop. And that wasn't working. So at one point, I sent one of those complaints with all the attachments, with all the stuff I was getting to AOL, Roadrunner, to try to get somebody to do something. And then I got an email from Leonard saying, oh, you'd like to complain? I bet I can make you moan. And there was like an emoji of the devil or something. And that's when it just hit me like a hammer, like, oh no, this is him. He's really doing this. He's obviously got like some problems. And it was very disturbing because I had like sort of looked forward to, you know, having some kind of a connection to these people because I'd sort of accepted them
Right.
as family. I have to say, yeah, I was being naive, but this was back, back in the early days of the internet, and I kind of bought it. It was like, okay. So, I mean, all the while this is happening, I'm also showing Bobby everything that's happening because he's like my online friend. We were always sharing stuff with each other, goofing around. We were like, he was living in Washington, D.C. He'd left New York City for a while, and we had reconnected. So I was keeping him apprised of what was happening with all the family. And then this started happening, and he and I would talk, and it was like, what do you think? And I didn't really want to tell Karen that her brother was doing this, but I had to. I felt like if maybe she can stop him, you know. So I felt like kind of queasy and disgusted, but and I really didn't want to tell her, like, hey, you know, your brother's sending me this really bad stuff, but I had to, and I did. So I sent her an email saying, I hate to have to tell you this, but I've been putting it together. This has been happening, and it looks like your brother's doing it for, you know, XYZ reasons. And then he sent me this email about, you know, you like to complain. And then things kind of went quiet for a short while until I heard back again from Karen.
So that happens, and there's a lot of detail in this book, including the emails and some of the text messages. So I would encourage people to get it. At one point, things kind of progress where Karen ends up, or you're told that Leonard will be taken care of, and Karen ends up going to the hospital for, I believe, a burn because of a pot that she dropped on
Mhm.
herself. Can you kind of tell us a little bit about that and the result of that?
After I'd sent that email to Karen to let her know that her brother was harassing me and sexually harassing me, uh, she wrote back that she was shocked and horrified, and I'm so sorry. I should have told you all this stuff sooner. And then she launched into a whole history of her brother's kind of psychological history and a little bit about some criminal history as well. So this all came rolling in um, as an explanation as to why. You know, I mean, you know, to preface this, at one point she said, you know, if you ever meet Leonard, um, just be warned, he's a little sensitive, but, you know, he's a little, what was it? He's a little different, or he's a little odd. Like there's some, I forget what the wording was exactly, but she was just, you know, just letting me know he's like a little, like, you know, a little sensitive. So she basically launched into like his entire psychiatric history with me about their family and a child who had died and a fire that was started that was blamed on him. I mean, it was really something out of Alfred Hitchcock. I mean, it really had everything, you know, family dysfunction, mental illness, possible murder, arson, hospitalizations, multiple hospitalizations, peeping, um, yeah, it was quite a long discussion about Leonard and stuff that he had done in the past, and it was pretty scary stuff. Um, then I had heard from her husband, Hal Gardner, who I hadn't heard from before, but of course I knew she was married and she had kids, and you know she talked about that a little bit. So I got an email from Hal, her husband, at that point explaining to me that they were very sorry and that they wished me no harm and they're really sorry this happened. But you know, Leonard has been dealt with, and they sent him back to Greystone, and he's like being dealt with, as they said. And boy, that was just such severe information to hear. Right, suddenly, you know, we're just writing to each other, and her brother just goes a little bit haywire, and now he's like being dealt with. So you know, I felt like really responsible for a lot of this stuff. Like, oh my God, you know, like putting it on me. You know, what did I do? You know, here I am just talking to this woman in Massachusetts, and you know, her brother's weird, okay, but now he's like, you know, been reinstitutionalized, and it was scary. It was like upsetting and unnerving, and I felt like I had really, you know, made a huge mistake with all of this.
And that's really when Sharon starts to up her game and becomes more vocal and becomes essentially kind of the biggest problem. Would that be accurate?
Well, the way it kind of rolled out was that uh, Sharon was very upset with Karen for being in touch with me, and she accused me of being a scam artist, and that I was just looking for money, and I was just doing all these nefarious things, which of course wasn't true. But it was very hurtful to be accused of doing that when I was like going into this like very earnestly and very genuinely. And now there was this woman who okay, your sister meets somebody on the internet. It's definitely something to be cautious about. You really don't want to invite strangers into your life. I mean, especially if you've got, kids and you're worried about that. But I wasn't making any moves that would make me look suspicious. Like I never asked them how much money they made or I never asked them where they lived exactly. I never asked like those kind of like really personal questions about them. It was all very kind of surface. So when Sharon came at me sideways with all of these accusations, um, that was, that was the beginning of everything going completely sideways.
And so that's going on, but then you kind of start to write Leonard again at some point, and one of Leonard's friends, Bob, gets a hold of your email and starts writing you. Can you tell us about Bob's email to you and who he was?
Well, in Karen's letter, where she talks about Leonard's history, she talked about an incident that involved the assault, sexual assault of a young lady, and Leonard was also accused of doing this along with two other people. One was named Robert, and the other one was named Lou, and they had both been convicted, but somehow Leonard had more money. He had means, he was in the finance world, and he was able to have a good lawyer, and he actually got off. So these two other cohorts went to prison, but Leonard did not. So out of the blue, I got an email from someone with an email whose name was Robert, and his nickname was like Felix. And I mean, there's a lot to go through in this book. There's a lot of detail. So if I have to step back a few steps to
Yeah,
explain it,
I know there's a lot of detail, and again,
yeah,
people are gonna have to buy the book to really be able to read all of it because it's a very detailed stories, and there's tons of side stories. We're gonna try to hit on a lot of them, but again, the book is You Have a Very Soft Voice, Susan. So please go ahead and buy a copy. Sorry to cut you off.
yeah. Thank you. When Karen first made all these sort of detailed Leonard's history, I shared it with my friend Bobby, and we talked about it, and we started Googling, and we started searching, and we actually found um, their offender profile pages on the New Jersey Department of Corrections websites. And you could look up offenders by last name and other information, and you're able to pull up, their profile, which says dates of incarceration, dates of release, what they did, aliases, that kind of information. So on Robert's offender page, one of his many aliases was Felix. So when I saw the email address, I immediately put it together that this was Leonard's friend, and he wanted to meet me. He's like, "Oh, I saw your picture. You're very pretty. Would you like to get together sometime? Like, I know your neighborhood. This and that." Um, and that was really, really, really scary, really creepy.
So you've got creepy guys emailing you. You've got the drama with this extended family that you just learned about. You've kind of rekindled a relationship with Leonard, and he invites you to Kink Fest. Can you tell us about what Kink Fest was going to be and um, what you felt about being invited to?
Well, what happened with Leonard was that he had been sent to Greystone, which is a pretty famous one. I think they've torn it down since. Um, a notorious psychiatric facility in New Jersey called Greystone Park, and all the info I was getting from Karen and her husband was that Leonard was being treated, and then Leonard had gotten out. I really wasn't trying to rekindle with Leonard because the whole thing was just very disturbing and off-putting. But at a certain point, when he got out, he was still writing to me and trying to connect with me, and I had done everything I could to just keep avoiding it, avoiding until I figured, okay, these people know where I live, they know everything about me. I got to do what I can to, like, mitigate what's going on here. I mean, I made a lot of mistakes along the way. I mean, I was really sucked in. I really should not have kept writing. I should have just kind of like backed away completely. But I was just really did not know what to do or how to handle this. So at a certain point, I thought I had smoothed everything out with Leonard. Um, and suddenly I start getting all these other emails from all these other people I didn't know, like people who were going to attend Leonard's party, Kink Fest, which was basically like the biggest sex party in the Western Hemisphere. Like there would be every possible kink there, there would be every possible thing there, every color of the rainbow, of everything would be there, and they were all into like BDSM and bondage and dominance and all of that kind of role playing and all that extreme stuff. Stuff I've heard of. I mean, I wasn't born in a barn. I'm from New York City. Like I've seen a lot. I know about these worlds that people inhabit. It's not my scene, but I've known people who've like been into this. So when I saw all this stuff coming in, it was like, oh, okay, yeah, these people are all involved with Leonard, and they were all into all this stuff, and there was like a lot of like, I'm going to train you to be my slave, and I'm going to do this and that, and I mean, it wasn't threatening really, but it was just very kind of seamy and gross, and I wasn't into it. It was definitely not wanted or requested. So I had written to Leonard, and I said, hey, can you tell these people to like stop writing to me, like, and please don't give out my email address to anyone. But there were a lot of them. There were like 10 or 15 people who started jumping into my inbox.
Yeah, I noted that one of them offered you a free session with a dominatrix,
Yeah,
and
yeah,
another one wanted you to be their slave bitch for the party.
yeah.
And you know,
Yeah, it was a lot of that.
again, I mean, these are, I can only imagine you're sitting there and all these emails are pouring in, and it's almost like, they think that you want to go and you're into that. And, if you're into that, okay, whatever. But if you're not, it's probably awkward to be receiving a lot of these emails. And you ultimately decide not to go, right?
I had considered going. I mean, that's how kind of like twisted into this whole vortex that I was, because I guess, without getting too deeply psychological about it, like I really felt like I could slay the dragon. Because at this point things were getting really edgy and really dark. And I was trying to solve my own problem without really knowing how to go about it. I felt like if I just befriended Leonard, everything would just smooth out, and then things would be sort of normal again. I didn't know what to do. Um, I guess there's sort of that like that Beauty and the Beast thing. You want to sort of tame that wildness in order to survive the situation. Um, I actually entertained going because I was curious about him. I was definitely afraid, but there was something, the curiosity was overriding the fear. Of course, I didn't go, but there was a moment or two where I was like, God, what would this be like? You know, it might be really awful. It might be really, it may solve the problem, because at that point I felt like I had just been sort of treated like I'm not really human. I'm just somebody to throw dirt at, just, humiliate and degrade. I just really wanted that to stop.
Yeah, and I completely understand that. And again, there's a lot of details in the book that we don't have time to cover, or we'd be here for hours.
Yeah.
But so I'm going to jump around some. So at one point, Felix and Sharon kind of team up, and um, so you've kind of got that going on, and you learn about Sharon placed a software on Leonard's computer, and that's how, she's allegedly finding out about all this stuff.
Well, Sharon had always been sort of in the background manipulating Leonard, telling him that I was bad, I was a scam artist, I was only after his money because apparently he was like very well off. He'd done very well in the finance world, and somehow I was after his money and all this stuff, which is not true. So, whatever was going on, there was a lot that I didn't know what was going on, but Sharon was definitely behind a lot of the stuff, and she had known these offender friends of Leonard's because of all the trial that they went through. And, there was a lot of talk. Of course, they were all enmeshed in these events that took place, years before. So it was just like a real, like kind of a scene where you're just getting pulled deeper and deeper into the quicksand. There was also other kinds of emails coming at me. There was threats to, come to my neighborhood. So there was a lot of stuff all kind of brewing all together at the same time. And I kept writing to Sharon for help. I was writing to Hal for help. And there would be moments of reprieve, and then stuff would start up all over again. But there was a moment where Hal told me that Leonard was involved in a possible murder that took place in New Jersey not too long before all of this started. And it was a terrible murder of a young woman who had a child. And apparently Leonard had met her on his travels out there in New Jersey, and talked to Karen and her husband about how excited he was at meeting this young lady. And then one day he just stopped talking about her. And then it came out in the news that she had been missing and that she was found murdered. It was a terrible, terrible crime. And that he was questioned in that crime. So when Hal told me that about Leonard, I finally just said, look, I can't deal with this anymore. I changed my email address. I changed my internet provider. I dumped a lot of email addresses that I had and just let them go, let them die. If you don't use an account, after a while, they just close it on you. So I was like just pulling up stakes and just trying to get away from them. And that's when I started going to the police, my local precinct in Brooklyn.
And the police aren't very helpful, right?
No, I mean, they were intrigued and they took my report, but there was really nothing that they could do because these people were in a different state. They really didn't know what to do. They're not the FBI. You know how police work. It's all very local, and they need evidence and they need crimes to
Right.
happen. And even in situations where women are seeking restraining orders in domestic violence relationships, there's a lot that the police can't do anyway. I mean, they basically kind of wait for something to happen in order for them to do something. They can't arrest someone before a crime takes place. So what I was giving them, yeah, it looked disturbing and everything, but there was really nothing really actionable that they could do about somebody sending me, very weird emails from New Jersey. There was just nothing that they could do. I just kept making reports. But I felt
And
like
so
I had
one
to
of
do
the
something.
sorry to cut you off, but one of the reports I found really interesting was you learn about the 12 tribes cult in upper New York.
Yeah.
And when I saw that, I was like, okay, this can't be real. And I actually, Googled and I was like, wow, that's actually a legitimate organization at one point. I don't know if they're still around, but can you kind of tell us about what happened with that and what were the threats for that?
Well, at one point, a lot of those one of those people that were sending me these kinky emails about Kinkfest was a guy named Carl, and Carl talked about the 12 tribes and how Felix, aka Robert, was involved with them, and that opened up a whole new Pandora's box of people and places and weirdness and crimes and nefariousness. So it gets kind of like there's a lot of stuff in the middle, but if you get up to that, the next chapter or so in the book, and yeah, like you said, there is a lot in it. It was a very densely packed year and a half long series of events, that there was so much that they were involved in, from A to Z. It just kept piling up and piling up. And at a certain point, there were threats of that they were going to attempt to kidnap me and my boyfriend at the time and take us up to this place upstate New York where the 12 tribes had a compound.
And they actually threatened to rape you repeatedly, and basically you have a child every year until they decide to eat you, right? Like that
Yeah,
was the threats, and you thought that this was very credible, right? And this is really, of course, freaking you out and making you very paranoid. And on top of that, your boyfriend that you're seeing at the time is also being followed, right? So
yes,
you've got like all these entities coming at you at once.
yeah. He started getting phone calls from anonymous calls with whispery threats. I'm going to get you. I'm going to kill you. Hang up calls, voicemail messages. And that went on for a while. That was really disturbing. Like, I couldn't understand how they even had his number, you know. It would be one thing to just write all of this off, but there was just a lot of really strange connections there that I just couldn't figure out how to connect it. Like, how did they get his phone number? I had never given his phone number out to anyone,
Right.
but they had somehow found it. And they talked about following us. I've seen you leave your house. I followed you to work. You don't know this, but we're watching you. And there was, a lot of stuff that, it really sounded like they did. It was just too real.
Yeah, and so all this is happening. You're continuing to get these threats, and I'm sure the stress is, just really taking a toll on your body and your emotional health. And then you have an instant where a red Bronco pulls up, and they ask if you're Sue.
Yeah.
And that's really got to be a very surreal moment to, you've got these threats on email, and they're threatening to kidnap you. And then you're walking, I believe you had your dog with you, and this Bronco pops up and the lady pops out, and you, of course, lie. Good for you. Can you tell us about how did that feel and how did that affect you?
Yeah. Well, during that time, I was incredibly on edge, very distracted, um, very withdrawn, worried constantly, disoriented, with one thing flying from one end to the other, and it never stopped. I mean, there would be like a break for a minute, and then the next week it would be like a whole other set of dramas and threats and disappearances and strange connections and criminals. So I was completely on edge. I was really like kind of like a shell of myself. I was worried at work. I was worried about checking my email. So one afternoon, I was walking my dog in my neighborhood. I was just a couple of blocks away from my building, and this truck pulled up past me, and then stopped suddenly. Like, I could tell, like it just seemed like a sudden stop. And this woman leaned out of the window of the car, and she's like, "Are you Sue?" And that was really weird because, like, not too many people call me Sue. Like, the people who I remember who called me Sue were the people I knew in high school in Queens. My name is Susan, so when someone calls me Sue, it's coming from a place and a time where people just, for some reason, just called me Sue. Um, and I didn't recognize her at all. Like, in that split second, I was like, is this someone I knew from the past? But like my recall of faces is very good. I would remember someone. I would remember someone that I went to grammar school with, like that. It's like that natural inborn facial recognition that we all have,
Right.
recognizing my father after 7 years, recognizing people I went to school with. And this woman didn't register anywhere on any anyone that I remember. So, and it was the way she said it too, like angrily. Um, so tallying up everything that was happening at the time, I was like, no, that's not me. And she's like, are you sure? You know, she really was like kind of like angry about it or firm about it. And I was like, yeah, no. And then they drove away and I just turned around and just backed up and I started walking. I didn't go straight to my building. I went around the block, down another block, and around and got back to my door as quickly as I could. But that was a little strange. I thought, are these people really following me? Like, how would they know me? I mean, how many pictures did they have of me? Like, it was just, I really felt like, you know, like I know it sounds completely paranoid, but I was paranoid. Like I'm being watched, I'm being followed, I'm being threatened, and now there's this strange person out of nowhere, you know, sort of like stopping me on the street. And I really didn't know what to do except to just, you know, BS my way out of it. Like there's no way I was just gonna say, "Oh yeah, that's
Yeah,
me. What's going
right.
on?"
You might
I
as
was
well
like,
get in the car at that point.
"Yeah, I got to get the hell out of here." It was very strange. I still don't have an explanation for that at all. Like even given everything to the end of the story and whatever happened at the end, I still can't. And people ask me about that moment all the time, and I still don't have an explanation for who it was or what kind of a weird coincidence that could have been.
Yeah, and there's a ton of this stuff in the book. Again, you've really got to get it to get the detail. We're just hitting on a few of these. And at one point, Carl, who is a friend of Lynn's and kind of a friend of yours, he gets hit with a hypodermic needle while he's out walking around. And it's reported to you that
Yeah.
his words were to the paramedics that like it was a 12 or something. So that's got to be, you know, on top of you've got the experience with the Bronco, and now you've got a guy that gets, you know, ambushed with a hypodermic needle, and you've got these threats of being drug out into, you know, a compound and raped and forced to make babies for this cult and then eaten.
Hmm.
Man, that's got, I'm sure that you were just on edge. Uh, is there, can you kind of describe how just emotionally torn apart you were at that time?
I was just a complete wreck. I was frightened all the time. I was having heart palpitations all the time. I was afraid. I had turned off the ringer on my phone because I was getting phone calls too, and hang-ups and strange calls and messages. At a certain point, it had leaked into my office in my job, where I was getting emails and phone calls at work too, and I couldn't figure out how do these people have my work? How do they know? And to me, getting stuff at work confirmed that they were following me to work because I just couldn't figure out how they would even know. Because at a certain point, I didn't tell Hal, I didn't tell Karen anything about where I worked. I had a new job, but where, you know, I was like working for a book publisher. I made it a point not to tell anybody where I was working, but somehow they had my email address, they had my phone number. Um, I was losing weight. I wasn't eating. I wasn't laughing. I really wasn't living. I was just spinning around in circles, dealing with all this stuff that was coming at me. And I really didn't know what to do next, like calling the cops. It was like not really helping. And actually, at a certain point, called the FBI with all kinds of, like you said, and it sounds completely crazy. I'm going to be kidnapped. I'm going to be eaten. I'm going to be raped and taken into this cult. I mean, if you're working at the FBI, you know, reception number, and you get a call like that, and as I was telling it, I knew how crazy it sounded. And I can only imagine what the person at the other end must have been thinking, like, oh my God, here's another one of these crazy people out there. We get calls like this all the time. And I spoke to this woman at the FBI and I told her a little bit of the story. And she's like, well, there's really nothing we can do. You should just go to the police. So the police were telling me to go to the FBI. The FBI was telling me to go to the police. It's just basically there was nowhere to turn. And I needed help.
And eventually you go to the FBI for the second time, and that's when you do meet Agent Waller.
Yeah.
And do you want to get into it, or do you want to leave this on, the edge here?
Well, there is just so much more to it, but
You know what? Why don't we do this? Why don't
what?
we go through the process of so Agent Waller finally sits down and listens to you, and this is kind of the first person that really believes the story or wants to actually invest the time into investigating this case. Would that be fair?
Yeah, my boyfriend at the time actually made the call to the FBI that got through, and mentioning the Tribe of 12 cult in upstate New York is what I found out afterward is what got Agent Waller's attention, um, listening to my crazy story, because I don't think he really believed me at first, but he was taking me seriously. So the fact that I had an appointment to go sit and actually talk to an FBI agent, I thought, well, this is my last chance. Like, there's really no one else that can help me. So we went down there to their headquarters in Lower Manhattan. Went through all the security, which is very tight to get up there. I sat in the waiting room for like what seemed like forever, waiting in this little gray room with a metal bar on the wall, and which I guess is where they handcuff people. Like, this is not my element. I work in the book world.
Right.
Sitting in an interrogation room in a police station or an FBI station is just was so alien to me. It was like chilling. This is real nasty, like crappy stuff to have to go through to, like, bring order back into my life. But I had all my emails, as many as I could. I had the printed out profiles of the two sex offenders in New Jersey. I took as much with me as I could, and I sat down, and he came in, and he was very professional, and he just listened to everything I said. He took notes. I was showing him what I had. But I was like feeling very much in command, because at least I knew, like, okay, this is my shot. This is the only way I'm going to get my way out of this. So I did the best I could to present my case to this FBI agent so that he would take me seriously. And just knowing that he was at least hearing me out, and that there was a place for this information to go, like, just in case something happened to me, at least they would know where to start looking at the breadcrumbs, like where, evidence. Because I was like really afraid. Like, I thought, like, something bad is going to happen here. There's no telling what these people are going to do. They're just doing this for the fun of it, obviously. But it got the wheels moving, and he did take me seriously. So that was the beginning of the unraveling.
Yeah, and looking back, when you're looking back at everything that happened, was there a moment where you kind of figured it out for yourself, or was that Agent Walker or Waller presenting that to you and kind of explaining the breakdown?
I never, I was not able to figure it out. It wasn't until they actually started sending out subpoenas that brought back real information that we were able to find out what happened. There was no way I would have figured out what really ultimately came out to be the truth behind it all. It was completely mystifying. And he even warned me. He said, look, even if we get an IP address, it could be from someone using a shared computer at a library. We don't know where this information is going to go, but we know we're just going to do our best to try to find out. And I was so relieved. I was like, well, even if I could just find out where it's coming from. Is it coming from New Jersey? Is it coming from Connecticut? Is it coming from Massachusetts? Like, I really had no idea. Is it,
Right.
who is this? It was just terrifying.
And I'm sure it was, and I don't want to give away the whole ending, but I will say that the FBI is able to figure out who's behind all this, and the U.S. district attorney's office actually adopts a case, which is nice because I don't know if you knew this, but they only take cases that they think they're going to win. Um, and so you kind of you talk about that process of kind of having some justification, or I don't think justice was really served on this, but why don't you tell us your feelings? Like, after everything was said and done, do you feel that the punishment that was given was good enough for the everything that you went through?
Now I do. Yeah. And then I was hoping for like a very long prison term, but laws were different back then. The stalking laws have changed since the internet has come into being, and they've had to adapt laws and punishment to adapt to the digital world, which is a frontier for crime, as everybody knows now. All different kinds: stalking, harassment, you know, hacking. The list goes on. I was really shocked that we got the outcome that we did. But I mean, what was worse was like finding out who it was,
Right.
and that that there's no explanation for that for me. But I was really grateful that I had some justice because as you know, not everybody gets justice, and not every case that the FBI investigates is prosecuted. The FBI only does investigations and they make recommendations to the prosecutor, and it's up to the prosecutor, in this case the federal government, to decide whether they want to pursue it. And not every case is investigated, not every case is prosecuted. There's a lot of reasons for me to be grateful for justice in a world where I know that a lot of people are not getting justice at all. So for me, with this insane little storm, insane hell that I was put through, for me to get justice was just it was really tremendous, and I'm just incredibly grateful that it did, because in terms of legal precedent, I mean, it really was like one of the first kind of stalking cases that was like really prosecuted in such a way. And if you listen to Dear Cousin on Audible, you hear the assistant U.S. attorney of the Southern District talk about that and the process of taking on these kinds of cases. And yeah, it is a rule that the feds will definitely take on a case and put it in court if they've got it on you, they've got it on you. They don't waste their time, they don't waste their money, and these are not the people you want to mess around with at all.
Yeah, when you're one of the things that this kind of reminded me of, that people that are younger can identify with is, now you've got stalking via, especially with like GPS now on phones, where kids are on Snapchat. And I used to work at a school at one point, so we were always dealing with that, where kids would make a fake account and they would start harassing each other, or people would share data. So I think this is kind of a good book too, for people to get that perspective of what this can really turn into if you let it. um I guess if you let it isn't the best way to put it, but
Right.
if if the offenders are allowed to continue to do this and they're not prosecuted and they're not investigated, then it doesn't stop until someone gets involved. I mean, they harassed you for over a year, and these were death threats. These were, you're being followed, your phone's ringing off the hook, they're affecting your work. And so you've got zero time in your day where you're not affected by this.
Right.
And people need to take that into consideration. And that's why I believe personally too, that if you're going to do that for a whole year, then you deserve to go to jail. and you deserve to have a harsh punishment.
Yeah, I think these types of cases, from what I've learned over the years after talking to people, meeting people who've been through other stalking incidences, which, you know, mine is a very unique case. But I think that since we're so in deep into the internet world, the digital world, it's just like a new kind of territory for all kinds of cruelty and mental torture. People can be incredibly brutal when it comes to, I mean, even children. I can't even
Right.
imagine what kids go through with all of the social media and the ways that they can hurt each other. I just can't even imagine how painful that must be. But these types of cases, I mean, and these types of stalkers, it's really about power and control. They want to see you squirm. They want to see you hurt. They want to push you as far as they can. But it's really about power and control and the way they can control your life. And I think that can be very addictive for certain personalities who are, twisted in some way, or people who have like serious mental issues who want to take out their stuff on strangers or even people that they know. Even family members I've heard of in some pretty bizarre cases. So this is like a kind of a new normal in a lot of ways. I mean, back when my case first started in the early 2000s, this was when they were starting to introduce emojis into legal language, you know, where you've got to interpret, like, what did that emoji mean? And these are like legal cases of stalking or threats or whatever, that it's seeped into, the very, fabric of our lives, like to that extent. So though the laws have tightened up, the laws have gotten better, um, people are still out there with stuff. After my book came out, I did hear from a couple of people who wrote to me who've read my book. They found me on, social media. They sent me a note here. I read your book and I went through something similar, or something similar is happening to me right now. Can I talk to you about it? So it's not just me. This is just the tip of the iceberg.
Well, I'm sorry that you had to deal with that, but I am glad that you are able to help others from these experiences and really share your attitude towards that. Do you have any projects in the works right now that you're looking to do?
Well, I do have some stuff percolating, but I can't talk about it
Okay.
just now. But yeah, there are other opportunities, and I think this story has touched a nerve. The podcast was very popular. I mean, I didn't sell a ton of books because you know what that's like. Selling true crime books. You make a few dollars, but you're not Stephen King. You're just kind of rolling along, and you're you've got your little quiet following of people who've read your work and like it, and that's always fantastic. Um, but it's important to me that people understand that they're not alone, and that for me that was really helpful to know that, okay, because I went through a long period of blaming myself. How could I have been so stupid? Why did I not figure this out? What is wrong with me? I went through a very long period of like real like self-blame, self-doubt, kind of beating myself up about, having this happen to me. But it took a long time for, like, just words of wisdom from people who said, look, they would have done it to someone else. It's really not just you, you know. But,
Right.
in the story, it really is about the perpetrator, but it's also a portrait of myself, because it's the dynamic between the stalker and the prey. And I think that's the interesting part about this particular story, is, the type of perpetrator who can spot the perfect victim, the perfect prey, someone that they know that they can wrap around their stem, and just keep twisting and keep twisting. And, it's really like about the limits of like what someone is willing to do to somebody else.
Yeah, it's a interesting perspective. All right. Well, thank you for coming on the show again. You have a very soft voice, Susan, is still available. Amazon, Barnes Noble, wherever you can buy books. And Dear Cousin, you can pick up on Audible. Susan, thank you so much.
Thank you so much for reading my book, for reaching out, for being interested in my story. I was so appreciative of that. So thank you, Cameron, so much.
All right. Well, best of luck to you on your next one or your next project.
And you too.
All right. Good night.
All right. Have a